We've been talking about it all season, all postseason, and now we're going to get into it. It is our coaching review for the Utah Mammoth 2025-26 season.
You are Locked On Mammoth, your daily podcast on the Utah Mammoth, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This may be the show you've been waiting for. Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Mammoth. I'm Tom Callahan, joined by co-host Robyn Leaño. Together with a dynamic duo that brings you Locked On Mammoth each and every single day. We appreciate you being here and joining us here. Robyn, we talk about culture, we talk about identity, we talk about consistency, and now we're going to talk about coaching. Our coaching review from this season. Robyn, by the time the year ended, maybe not as straightforward as we thought it might have been, because there were plentiful ups and downs. And this is not just about head coach André Tourigny, although we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about the coaching staff as a whole and also talk about the effect of that staff on the team and their play. Robyn, I'm going to open this up by saying, first and foremost, I don't know how much my opinions change, but I'm willing to talk through things here with you on the show today so that we can formulate our ideal consensus going forward for this Utah Mammoth team. We set the bar at playoffs or bust. They did make the playoffs. Wild card one, that mission was accomplished. So if the coaching staff hit that goal, obviously the whole team hit it, then where do we go from here? What are your opening thoughts on this?
It's a tough thing, Tom, because I feel like a lot of us have talked about, like, if the team didn't make the playoffs, then for sure the coaching staff is gone. And if they did, then it might have saved them. Yet at the same time, I feel like a lot of us are kind of feeling very split about that emotion, because I just don't think that the improvements outweighed the still glaring gaps. And the glaring gaps are very, very coachable, by the way.
So there were a couple of times this season, and I put the keywords if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're not, I will tell you that the second bullet is the three keywords for me: identity, consistency, culture.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my keywords for any team, any sport. And there are times, Robyn, even in the spring of this regular season, where even André Tourigny himself said, well, we need to work on our culture. And he and the players said, well, we're just not consistent. We need to find our consistency. Then there was some
identity is.
Sorry?
It's like, or we need to find out what our identity is.
Right. Well, that's the other thing. Or the identity was in question. So, Robyn, I need to talk about those keywords and say, number one, I think the players themselves in their physical skill sets, in their hockey skills, took a step forward. I think that moved this team further forward. I think Nick Schmaltz moved this team forward all by himself. Remember the streaks they went on, those two big, massive winning streaks? You know who is central to those winning streaks?
Nick Schmaltz.
Absolutely Nick Schmaltz. It wasn't Keller, it wasn't Cooley, it wasn't Guenther. It wasn't Crouse. It wasn't Sergachev.
They played supporting cast,
yes,
but they weren't the star.
Absolutely.
And that's the very reason why Schmaltz got the contract extension that he did.
Yes, I agree. But when he was human, when he was average, they didn't go on those tears.
Mm-hmm.
Robyn, can we agree, you and I, and maybe the viewers and listeners may or may not agree with this statement? I think this Mammoth team is one of the most talented rosters in the NHL. And I'm talking the whole league, not just the West, not just the Central Division. I think they have one of the most talented rosters in the NHL. Do you think I'm barking up the wrong tree? Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. I feel like this team is very talented, and I think they're definitely up there. It's just tough when you compare to some of the teams that have incredibly stacked rosters. I mean, you and I have talked crazy about what kind of team Colorado has, or what kind of team or Vegas has had, for example. But when you take a look at the team and knowing what we've covered and how the depth actually is, it's severely underrated. That I will put out there. This team is like the talent on this team is severely underrated still. And they still got an incredible amount of talent. And I think could be even much better, by the way.
I think what happens to Utah, why they get overlooked, is because people look at other teams and they see McKinnon, they see McCarr, they see McDavid, they see Crosby, they see Ovechkin, they see stars, like superstars, players who have dominated this league at one time or another. And they just assume that that team is more talented because of one or two players. The Utah Mammoth don't have a 50, 60, 70 goal guy yet. I think Guenther can get there. They don't have a 100-point performer yet, but I think they can get there. Several players can get there. So, Robyn, they don't have those superstar metrics. They just don't. They have stars, but not superstars. And we've talked about how Tom just doesn't throw superstar around lightly. So, to me, I think that's why. But I do think the collection of talent across the board is one of the better teams in the NHL. I'd say this is a top 10 roster talent team to me. But, Robyn, now that means to me the coaching, when you look at finishing in wild card one, when you look at really letting leads slip, especially in the playoffs. 5 times in a 6-game series, as it turned out, Robyn, they had third period leads and they blew 3 of them. That's coaching to me. That is not giving your players and your talent the tools to win. And so I want to get into talking about this because what I don't like about the identity, the consistency, and the culture can be highlighted at several points along the way. And to me, if those talented players weren't carrying this team at various times, no matter who got hot, especially though, as we mentioned, it was Schmaltz, but if it was Keller, if it was Cooley, if it was Guenther, if it was Crouse got hot for a while. If these guys weren't carrying the team, they weren't getting it done. And that is why, Robyn, I am going to have a hard time. And I think it's already almost a little too late for them to change out the staff. I don't know if they're going to. And it's kind of weird that it's taken this long to either announce an extension or a decision. But I don't know that I'm offering an extension. Now, I realize there's a couple of problems going around right now. Maybe you're waiting on a candidate who's still with a playoff team. Vegas isn't like letting Cassidy talk to anybody,
which I think is kind of crazy, by the way.
That's a D-bag move by Vegas, but you should expect nothing less. So, I mean, that's just okay. I mean, it's what they're doing, whatever. You move on. That said, I think there are coaching candidates out there that you're wasting time by not talking to if you're going to make a change. And obviously they're not making a change at GM, and I don't think they should. But Robyn, this team underperformed. They underperformed
in several key areas. They did. And if you think otherwise, then sure. I mean, that could be any of your opinions, but like Tom, like you and I, collectively have covered this game for long enough to kind of see those areas and see those flaws very clearly. And to go back to where I said at the beginning of this segment and beginning of this show is saying that those gaps, those flaws are coachable flaws.
Yes, they absolutely are. Robyn, why don't we get into some of those things, the way we believe they can improve? Even if the current staff isn't going anywhere. However, there are some also bones to be picked with special teams, with the 5-on-5, with the defensive play. Oh, we're going to get into it. Today's show brought to you in part by Game Time. There's nothing like playoff hockey live. The intensity, the rivalries, the crowd, another overtime game with Carolina-Montreal last night. It's just different when you're in the building. Playoffs are some of the best moments in sports, and being there in person is something every fan should experience. Game Time makes it incredibly easy to find tickets, even for those high-demand playoff games, in just a few taps. And with the Game Time guarantee, you know you're getting 100% authentic tickets delivered on time at the best price. Jump on the Game Time app, download it, create your account, and check it out. Some of these playoff matchups, especially if you're looking to Vegas, maybe you're looking to make the drive over there. I will say this about Vegas. That arena puts on a show. That team puts on a show in that building. It's pretty awesome. Even for games you might think they're impossible to get tickets for, and the app is super easy to use. You can find tickets fast, and the pricing's all in. So what you see is what you pay. There's no surprise fees, which I love. That's probably my favorite thing. But one of my other favorite features, seat view. If you're going to a new arena, if you're thinking about going to Colorado, if you're thinking about going to Vegas, you can actually see what your view looks like before you buy, which does, to me, make a huge difference. And the zone deals are awesome. You pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save money. Plus, with that lower price guarantee I was talking about and ticket coverage, I feel confident every time I buy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, and use our code LOCKED ON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKED ON, LOCKEDON, LOCKED ON for $20 off. Tom Callahan, Robyn Leaño, thanks for making us your first listen each and every single day when it comes to this Utah Mammoth hockey team. Everydayers, thanks for being here, guys. And if you're new to the show, welcome. We appreciate you joining us here. It's going to be a busy offseason in Locked On Mammoth. And Locked On is now the #1 sports podcast network, and we have you to thank for that as well. Robyn, when it comes to the culture of this team, the identity, the consistency, we talked about it on our show the other day about GM Bill Armstrong. He says he wants the identity to be big, strong, hard to play against, physical. Then there's the consistency issue. Well, if your identity is big, strong, physical, hard to play against, but they also have some little speed guys. Okay, now we're talking, how are we going to make this all fit? Well, that's coaching. What is the culture inside that locker room? Well, that is also coaching. Mm-hmm. It has to come from up top. It has to then be passed from the coaching staff down to the captains, and the captains down to everybody else in the room. Robyn, I feel like this team was still hunting for their identity, still searching for that consistency, and still trying to figure out exactly what the team culture is and is supposed to be. And it's been that way for years.
And I feel like at many times that what they wanted to be were at odds with each other, right? You talked about how they wanted to be, there is a lot of it wanted to be that big physical, but add the speed. And you have the guys that do that, but then you still have some of the more, quote, undersized players who, I mean, all they're going to focus on is their speed. They're not going to get physical. They're not going to, that's not in their DNA. They just score, right? They're pure scorers or just pure playmakers. So when you see that happen, when they're at odds with each other, you can very well see it make a difference. And sometimes it can actually get under the skin of some of those players. Like, oh no, like these guys, like they're trying to match the physicality of a player that doesn't normally do that, and all of a sudden, well, guess what? Penalties.
Yeah, and discipline is part of it, right? The leadership, the coaching, the discipline. Turnovers is part of the discipline. To not make, just ignore your instinct to make that 180-foot pass because it doesn't exist. And all those things. Robyn, I feel like even if the system were different, if the breakouts were different, if the neutral zone play was different, if the forecheck was different, these are all elements of coaching. And
the forecheck.
Robyn, we're going to come back to André Tourigny. By the way, and I say this all the time, and I mean it, and I just want to repeat it. This is nothing personal against André Tourigny. I feel like he's a guy I'd love to have beers with. I would love to talk hockey with him. I really would. I think he'd be funny. He'd be entertaining. It would be a great chat. I think it'd be awesome. But that's not what this is about.
And also, I also will also say this, by the way, and this is also not a knock of him as a coach as a whole. We're talking about at a certain stage, because that makes a difference too.
Well, Robyn, it makes a difference in that they've gotten these players to where they can. They've gotten them into the playoffs, and it's little baby steps every year, right? These incremental improvements. But again, there's still these big problems. To me, they're big problems. They're glaring problems that are still there. And one of the big glaring problems, Robyn, was the power play this year, which was absent for most of it. Then during the Olympic break, showed up in a big way for the rest of the regular season, and then disappeared once again. The power play ghosted the rest of the Utah Mammoths. So
they were like the second best power play after the Olympic break, right?
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah, it's 31.3, I think, or 31.4.
Unbelievable.
Crazy.
And then non-existent in the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, one goes to consistency, but two, it shows that Vegas knew, by the way, how to exploit that. And that probably you can give them credit. I mean, you take a look at where Vegas is right now at this point when everyone's listening to this, when most people are listening to this, they're one game away from the Stanley Cup final. So it's interesting when you look at it that way, but the power play as a whole for this Utah team has just been very lackluster. I have given the power play so much crap over the course of this season, Tom. How many times have I done that? How many times have I said, do we try something different? I think they do. I think Utah does a variation of like a 1-3-1 in their power play. And I'm like, why don't you try something different? Why don't you bring in some old school overload or whatever it might be? Try something different. But we didn't see that. They just all the same. And still, we saw a lot of what? Guess what? Dump and change.
I mean, the formula wasn't all that hard to figure out. Guenther on the off wing, take away the one time, and then make everybody else make a play. And the problem is everybody else tried to make a play and turned the puck over or missed the net with shots or what have you. And Robyn, when they're taking away that Guenther, I mean, and Guenther himself has got to get open. He's got to move around, but you got to do things to get Guenther open. We talked about having a one-time option on either side of the ice. So then, okay, if you do take away Guenther, you have somebody at the far dot on the other side who could crank one. Yeah, you do. You got to mix it up. You got to try different things. And so to me, again, coaching. The penalty kill, supremely average for much of the year. And sometimes it wasn't very good. It is effort out of the players, but it's also penalty killing is discipline. Penalty killing is structure. Penalty killing is X's and O's. And Robyn, I feel like the lack of consistency when it comes down to all of it, the lack of consistency can be traced back to all of these elements. And it starts up top because on paper, this team should be winning playoff round after playoff round, in my opinion.
I mean, they should be. If you take a look at just the metrics of who can score and who can make the difference, right? I mean, how many times are we going to talk up Dylan Guenther for his pure scoring? I mean, you mentioned his name, and like that's what the PP1 was focusing on, right? Trying to feed it to Guenther on that, and right there at the faceoff dot. But you can't be a one-trick pony. You have to figure a lot of those things out. You have to be able to adapt. You got to be able to learn those things on the fly.
And I say this all the. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and they didn't do that.
I say this all the time, and Robyn, I mean it, and Carolina is doing it right now. And Freddie Anderson has not had to be special in this playoffs. Mm-hmm. He's merely had to be just good enough. You can win a Stanley Cup with average to slightly above average goaltending if you are able to possess the puck. And I think Utah is built to be able to do that.
And that's why I got so frustrated in the first round against Vegas, is because I saw what this team could be doing, and I saw that they weren't able to establish any forecheck. They weren't able to keep the puck in their own zone. And they just let Vegas break out. And I'm wondering to myself, like, are you like going to put any extra pressure on there? Or are you just kind of gonna just immediately rush to the back check and hope that you can break out back the other way if there's any kind of broken play?
It was tough to watch at times. It was difficult.
So, because there were so many times in which this team had the perfect opportunity to have just an overload in the offensive zone. They could have put so much pressure on to tire the team out, to keep the defensemen moving, to break up an open lane and beat Carter Hart in that first round, but they didn't do that. And not just the first round, by the way. And this was the same formula for the entirety of the season. Sometimes they got better, but that also was a decision, not a basis off who they matched up against, because again, matching up against certain players and their structures are going to make the difference. That's why there's film. That's why you have to adapt. And I'm not saying you have to completely abandon your identity, but you have to understand what going back to what you were saying earlier, what the identity is first, to be able to find out where your boundaries are on shifting and to adapt to other games.
So the question becomes, what now? And we're going to dive into that one right after this.
And today's episode is brought to you by Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Workplace chaos, deadline stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill is still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Sponsored Jobs. Indeed, Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Spend less time searching, more time actually interviewing those candidates who check all your boxes. Less time, less stress, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now. Support our show saying you heard about Indeed on this show. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Tom Callahan, Robyn Leaño, Locked On Mammoth. Thanks for joining us. Hey, subscribe if you don't already. If you like the show, just click the subscribe button, or you can subscribe everywhere you get your audio podcast. You're looking for a little something extra. Join the Everydayer Club, lockedonmammoth.supercast.com. That's lockedonmammoth.supercast.com. Just $5 a month, $50 for the entire year. And you get the Everydayer Discord, which is a tremendous thing. Great community over there. Love talking hockey with everybody there. Plus the ad-free audio version of this show. Skip all the ads every single day on the podcast app of your choice. Plus, Locked On, the national show, ad-free every single day. Also, all those draft previews we talked about, the free agency preview, everything that you've got going on right now, special shows popping up on there all the time. You can jump into the other Discords too. Of course, we know you're going to be in the Mammoth Discord. Maybe you're a Jazz fan. Maybe you like baseball. Maybe you're waiting to see if Salt Lake's getting a baseball team. You can jump into some other MLB chats right now. So, Robyn, just if we always tell people, hey, if it's not for you, that's cool. We appreciate you being here. Just subscribe and click the button for us. But we get to talk about a lot of cool things. We get to talk about some difficult things. And I think talking about this coaching review is difficult because, you know, I always keep in mind, hey, I'm talking about somebody's job. I'm talking about somebody's livelihood. But I also am talking about the fact that sports is a business and you want to win hockey games. And the Central is tough. And I think if you are not firing on all cylinders at all times, there's just no way you're going to be able to run with the big dogs. And I feel like right now the Utah Mammoth just simply aren't capable because of the way they're coached of running with the big dogs.
And I've said it multiple times, just kind of like in a shorter way, by the way, of how I mentioned earlier in the show that like I've always thought that this coaching, specifically André Tourigny, I felt like he was the right man for the job when first hired by the years on the Coyotes. At the time, that was a very young team that needed someone who had more developmental skill. He came in over as the head coach of, I want to say it was the Ottawa 67s, right, as the OHL. So he knew how to coach young guys. But at a certain point, you need someone who's got a NHL winning pedigree, who can understand how to take you to the next level. And it's very clear to me that they're not at there. I see this coaching staff, and I see stubbornness, and I also see just lack of accountability overall. And that goes for everybody, by the way. And I will say that it does include some members of the Utah media. I feel like they don't push this coaching staff as much as you and I would like. I think
Right.
if you and I were in the scrums, we'd probably be pushing. Media relations they wouldn't like us very much, but we would push.
Well, that's our job.
That is our job, right?
We honestly, I do feel like the media is pretty polite, and it's kind of funny because even when they ask what I consider sometimes an innocuous question, Bear gets a little snippy with them, and I think
the
it's
thing is
funny.
it is funny, and here's the thing, by the way, like, and you know that there are times in which I'm not afraid to ask the tough questions. I've learned this at the AHL level, right? Where like I would ask Mike Van Ryn or Jerry Verde, by the way, both of which who have a known act of snapping back at you if you ask the wrong question. But you just take it. They're not going to do like they're not going to revoke your press credential right then and there, for asking just one question that might get them over the edge. Now, if you get personal, then yes, probably they
Which you never should.
You never do that. You should never do that. But
you never should.
But for the most part, a lot of them they get snarky. That's the word. Like, they get snarky.
Yeah.
Like, and I'll say as the perfect example, right? Just look at what John Tortorella does, right? If you just look at any compilation of John Tortorella with press, people press him, but he gets snarky and he gets like he jokes about it, and he's like, I don't know who gave you your press credential, but whatever. But I loved his rivalry with Larry Brooks. That was my favorite. But
I have been in several John Tortorella pressers. I have Ron Wilson.
Did a phone go off on one of them?
I don't know. I'm trying to think now if I've ever been around for that to happen around him. But he was one. Ron Wilson was another one. He was something else in a press conference. Robyn, everybody's different. Okay, everybody's different. And actually,
Rich Tocchet even had more of a little bit more bite to him.
Yeah. And I mean, Bears, for the most part, he's got a cordial relationship with everybody. He comes in, he's joking, he's smiling at the beginning of most of his media sessions. So at least there's that. But you could say the same thing about Pete DeBoer, and I was not a big Pete DeBoer fan. So, I'm not going to go off on that tangent now.
Pete DeBoer, I think, could have still a little more. Can get very high-headed, but
yeah,
it depends on the day.
Yes. Well, it depends what your point is you're trying to get across. But Robyn, the point I'm trying to get across is I think the Utah Mammoth now are at a point where they need an elite coach. There, I said it. They need an elite coach. They need better coaching.
They do.
And with the contract up, no news of a renewal yet. I don't know if this is a situation that's going to wait.
This year or was it next year? Pretty sure it was next year.
How pressing? Let me ask you this. How pressing is it that if you're going to take action, that you do anything between now and the draft as far as the coach goes? I understand it would be pressing for the general manager, but Robyn, does it actually make a difference? You have rookie camp in July. Ideally, you'd like to have everything settled by then, right? But does it matter right now? Does it matter if you wait till the end of June? Is that going to make a huge difference? Middle of June?
At this point, no. I probably not. Because Bill Armstrong is going to do what he's going to do, right? At this point, it's kind of like in a weird phase. We're not going to see that much of a difference. But I mean, if you're gonna go straight out and and fire him, let's say, like right before the preseason or even like 2 games in,
Right.
then obviously that's like, okay, that seems a little wild out there.
So by
Um,
the way, 26-27 for Tourney. Runs through
okay,
26-27.
so next year, so he has 1 more year on his contract.
Yeah.
I will say this, the fact that usually we hear about it much sooner, the fact that we haven't heard of any extension, I think that seat is now really hot for him. If he's not going to get let go by this, by the coming draft or whatever,
I don't think he's going anywhere. I honestly don't.
no,
I
he's
don't think
probably not. He will have 1 more year, and I think at that point, they will decide what things look like.
Yeah.
But the fact that we haven't heard yet of an extension, I feel like that's kind of already telling.
I don't know.
Or at least any kind of thing, or any kind of conversation of it coming close or anything.
You know what it comes down to, Robin? Quite simply is this is his prove it season. And believe me, you got to prove it to me. I know you got to prove it to you. I know they got to prove it to all of the Utah Mammoth fans. It is prove it time. Prove that you can play consistent hockey. Prove that you can play 60 minutes. Prove that you can eliminate these unforced errors and get rid of the naps and establish a consistent forecheck. Tell me what your identity is. Tell me what your culture is. Show me your consistency. Stop talking about it, because you've been talking about it for what, 6 years now? Long time everydayers know this. So, Robin, I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts down in the comments too. I better believe this is going to be one of our.
It's going to be interesting because, again, like to me, I just feel like a loss of hers. I'm thinking, like in my head, do I really want to go through another year of seeing these same mistakes? But like,
No.
and again, no, of course not. But like, I see where you're coming from, though, as saying that this is a prove it year. But at the same time, I'm like, but that also increases the risk of seeing the same thing. And then people were telling me it's just a few years. And I'm like, I have seen André Tourigny as coach of this team for 5 years now. Yeah, I want to say, about 5 years. 5, almost 6 years. Like, it's at this point.
It's frustrating. It is. It's just frustrating, period. I don't know too many other ways we could put it. This is exactly where this team has kind of gotten into it. I don't know. The 5 years. So he took over 21-22.
Yep.
Didn't make the playoffs, obviously, with the Coyotes for the next 3 seasons there. They moved to Utah. They finally made the playoffs in year 5 of him as a coach. I'm kind of surprised he got that long, but they signed him to a 3-year extension, which runs out 26.
I mean, I'm not surprised he went that long. I know that there was a level of patience in first, because the first 3 years, I think, were building years, like very, very heavy building years. They're still kind of figuring out what they wanted. That's when they drafted Guenther, and then they drafted Cooley, figuring out the rest. So I understand those first 3 years. After year 4, so the first year in Utah, that's when I saw the same things, and I started to turn the heat up a little bit. This year, I was watching to see the same things, and I see it again. And that's why I was wondering if it was going to be done this offseason. And since it hasn't, probably not, which does mean it goes into what you're saying, Tom, prove it year. But at this point, that is like, what's the best? That's the best way to put it. If any of you have like one of those like flat top stoves, and you have like one of those like one of those options that say like quick boil and you put it all the way in high, that's where it's at right now.
Nice. I'm going to go back to something I said all the way in the beginning of the show when I talked about the talent level of this team, and I do believe they're a top 10 talented team. They're no longer developing. Now they need to be in action. They need to be a top 10 NHL team because they have top 10 NHL talent. And that, Robin, to me, I think is now hampering the further development of this club. It is further hampering the evolution of Keller into a 100-point guy, of Guenther into a 40 or 50 goal scorer, of Cooley into the next big thing, into this team's 1C. It is hampering these things. These guys should be putting up even more points.
Okay, here's a question for you, Tom, and I want to get you. And I since you have the opinion, since you had the belief that it will be a prove-it year coming up from 26-27 for André Tourigny, if let's say at a certain benchmark part in the year, Utah is underperforming to the expectations, still making the same mistakes, do you let him go and let's say insert John Madden as interim head coach?
I mean, it probably couldn't hurt if you get off to a bad start. You've only got 1 year left in the deal. But I don't think they'll do that because I really do think Bill Armstrong absolutely believes in André Tourigny. I think he does. I think he's just 1,000,000%. This is his guy. I just don't think it's the right bet. But no, I don't think they'll midseason replace him. I think they'll go all the way back into the ground, miss the playoffs, flame out, and then just change things if that's the way it goes. I hope it's not the way it goes. I hope we're talking about winning a playoff series or two. I hope this team's a 100-point team next year. That's what but they need to take that next step forward again next year. So, and there's ways they can do that, things they can address, but I don't know. I where I'm sitting right now today, I don't have the confidence that that's going to be.
I will, as in on honest thing though, I will say this. I'm still surprised that I haven't heard anything about Blaine Forsythe. I
figured you were going to bring it up all by yourself. So I
figured like we're pushing on 40 minutes here, and I'm surprised I haven't mentioned it earlier.
I thought for sure you were going to get into it. All right, Robin, go. Give me your, what do you got?
I mean, as simple as I put it, Blaine Forsythe runs the power play. We talked about the power play earlier. It's been a mess for years, and we haven't seen any improvement. And Forsythe, if you actually look up articles, by the way, on Blaine Forsythe, apparently not a great track record either in some of his old places.
Power play sub average. Yeah, no, it's not hard to do the research, and you can see it. The numbers speak for themselves.
And that's why I actually have more faith in John Madden. I feel like John Madden is a pretty darn good PK and defensive coach.
So here we are. We are arrived at, we would like things to change, but they're not going to.
Yeah.
So I think that's just where we are. Robin, if folks want to reach out to us and comment on social media, where can they find us?
Everywhere on social media at Locked On Mammoth. That's at Locked On Mammoth. You can find me personally at Robin with a Y _LEANO.
And you can find me on Blue Sky at Tom Talks and on Twitter at Callahan on Air. Later on this week, Robin and I are actually going to start the debate. Which topics should we narrow it down to? When we're talking about the burning questions facing this team in the offseason, there's about 20 of them. So we're going to ask you guys to help us with some online voting, your thoughts, your comments. We're going to whittle it down, and then we're going to pick and do our series of the biggest burning questions facing this Mammoth team. For Robin, I'm Tom. We'll talk to you next time on Locked On Mammoth.